The chambers of the Galactic Council had been carved from a living asteroid the size of a continent. Every civilization that mattered, the Zorvac hegemony, the Cerelian Communion, the ancient Drath Collective, the machine minds of the Omnivex Conclave, had sent their finest diplomats to the halls of Varith Prime. Holographic banners floated in the recycled air, each bearing the sigils of 47 member species. 48 if you counted humanity. Most of the council had stopped counting. Ambassador Cale Drenworth walked the corridor toward the Grand Assembly Hall with the unhurried calm of a man who had already decided what he was going to say. He was 46 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His aide, Lieutenant Priya Nasco, kept pace beside him, datapad in hand, reading aloud the morning's agenda. The Zorvac motion to reclassify Terran colonial expansion as unregulated biological spread comes up third, she said. After the Cerelian petition to revise humanity's voting weight from 1 to 0.3, adjusted for developmental status. Developmental status? Cale repeated quietly. That's a new one. They've been workshopping it for 2 years. Cale almost smiled. 2 years. The Cerelians had spent 2 years preparing language to legally diminish humanity, and in 2 days humanity would make that language irrelevant. He knew the numbers. Earth's Joint Colonial Authority had reviewed them for 6 months. The Secretary-General had reviewed them for 3 more. Cale had reviewed them every morning for the past 12 weeks, the way some people reviewed scripture. The doors to the Grand Assembly Hall were 40 meters tall, cast from a mineral found only in the Kethra star system, a black stone veined with bioluminescent gold. They parted silently as Cale approached. Inside, 1,000 representatives from across the known galaxy turned to observe the human delegation's entrance. The Drath Collective's envoy, a towering being called Executor Valzen, whose biomechanical frame rose nearly 3 meters, spoke first from its elevated dais. The Terran delegation arrives within acceptable tolerances. Ambassador Drenworth, we note you have requested an emergency addendum to today's session. I have, Cale said. He took his seat at the semicircular human table, a modest structure positioned as always, near the outer ring of the chamber, far from the central speaker's podium. Before we address your addendum, said High Diplomat Asavel Threen of the Cerelians, a silver-furred being with 6 manipulator arms, the Council will first process the Cerelian motion regarding Terran developmental reclassification. What followed was 3 hours of careful clinical dismantlement of humanity standing in the galaxy. Speaker after speaker from allied civilizations endorsed the motion. The Zorvac described human expansion as ecologically aggressive. The Omnivex submitted a probability matrix concluding that human civilization would, within 2 centuries, become a resource competition event of Class 7 severity. Priya passed Cale note after note. He read none of them. He sat with his hands folded, watching with the serene patience of someone waiting for a very predictable storm to exhaust itself. When the final endorsement was registered, Executor Valzen turned its compound optical sensors toward the human delegation. Ambassador Drenworth, the Council has heard 41 supporting statements for the motion. Does the Terran delegation wish to offer a rebuttal? Cale stood. He straightened his jacket, the deep charcoal gray of Earth's diplomatic corps, with no medals and no decorations except the small blue and white planet emblem at his collar. No rebuttal, he said. But I do have that addendum. A low murmur moved through the hall. Cale walked to the central speaker's podium. This in itself was unusual. Human representatives rarely left their outer ring tables. He set a small data chip on the podium's reader surface and looked out at 1,000 alien faces. 47 years ago, he began, Earth sent its first delegation to this council. We were primitive by your metrics. Our fastest ships took 6 years to cross the gap to this station. We had no energy weapons, no quantum drives, no orbital fabrication networks. We came here with wool suits and paper documents, and we asked for a seat at the table. You gave us one. In the outer ring. We were grateful. He paused. The silence was total. We are no longer grateful, Cale said. We are done. The murmur became a roar. Executor Valzen raised one massive manipulator arm for silence. The Council obeyed. Even among alien civilizations, the instinct to listen when something unprecedented was happening proved universal. Ambassador Drenworth, the executor said slowly, each translated word carrying the weight of institutional gravity, you are speaking before the full assembly of the Galactic Council. Please clarify the meaning of your statement. When you say, done, do you refer to today's session or? I refer to all of it, Kale said. Humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Council. Effective as of this moment. The data chip on the reader's surface pulsed once, a soft blue light, and then the holographic displays around the chamber populated with text. Every delegate's personal reader pinged simultaneously. 47 civilizations received the same document at the same instant, the Terran Declaration of Autonomous Sovereignty. 43 pages. 14 years in the making. High Diplomat Esavel Threne's 6 arms moved rapidly through agitated gestures. This is procedurally impossible. A member species cannot unilaterally withdraw. Article 7 of the Foundational Compact is a document humanity never ratified in its current form, Kale said calmly. We signed the original compact in 2247. The Council amended it in 2251, 2258, 2269, and 2301, each amendment reducing human voting weight and expanding Council authority over Terran colonial space, without convening a ratification process for non-founding members. Our legal team's analysis is in Appendix 4. Somewhere in the outer ring, the Omnivex Conclave's 3 machine representatives were processing at visible speed, their chassis humming with computational effort. Even granting that argument, said Counselor Merath of the Zorvak, his bioluminescent throat sac flaring deep amber, withdrawal without 60 years' notice violates. The 60-year notice requirement was added in the 2301 amendment, Kale said, which, as established, was not ratified by Earth. We referenced this in Appendix 7. Priya Nasco, still at the outer ring human table, allowed herself the smallest of smiles. She'd written Appendix 7. The chamber dissolved into cross-species argument. On a dozen frequencies and in 30 languages, delegates talked over each other, through each other, at each other. Kale stood at the central podium and waited. He'd been trained to do this, to occupy silence like a landscape, to let the storm break around him. 42 light-minutes away, at Earth Orbital Command above the blue crescent of humanity's homeworld, Admiral Sorentak Mbui watched the transmission delay make Kale's statement arrive 12 minutes after it was spoken. The Admiral was a broad-shouldered woman with close-cropped natural hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades in zero-gravity environments. She stood at the center of a command dome surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of every registered human vessel in inhabited space. There were 4,811 of them. All right, she said quietly to her operations staff. Phase 2. Across known space, human vessels began to move. Not aggressively. Not in formations that could be interpreted as military buildup. The legal review team had been exhaustive about this. They moved to new positions, yes. Positions that happened to be adjacent to every human colonial world that had been placed under Council administrative supervision over the past 40 years. Positions that happened to bracket every resource corridor that the Zorvak had been quietly taxing Terran shipping through for the past 2 decades. Back on Vareth Prime, one of the Omnivex machines finally spoke. Its voice was flat, synthetic, and utterly precise. Ambassador Drenworth. We have modeled 17,000 possible response scenarios to this action. In 14,200 of them, humanity suffers catastrophic losses. Run scenario 14,201, Kale said. A beat of silence. We have no scenario 14,201, the machine said. Then build one, Kale said. The one where we're right. He turned to face the full chamber. Earth is not leaving because we are weak. We are leaving because we have spent 47 years watching this council decide what humanity is allowed to be. We've been told our expansion is aggressive, our development is dangerous, our presence in this galaxy is a problem to be managed. We've been taxed without representation, surveilled without consent, and reclassified as a developmental species while our ships have been quietly building the infrastructure that keeps a third of your colonial networks operational. You let that land. We're not asking permission anymore. We haven't needed it for 15 years. We just hadn't told you yet. The chamber erupted again, but this time Kale was already walking back to his table. The declaration was filed. The chip was spent. The message was sent. Humanity had left the building. The first week after the withdrawal was the strangest week in human diplomatic history, because nothing happened. The Council expected retaliation. That was, after all, how it worked among the older civilizations. When the Sorelian Communion had attempted to leave in 2199, the Drath Collective had blockaded their home system within 72 hours. When a minor species called the Vrethii had simply stopped attending sessions in 2310, they had been absorbed into the Zorvak sphere of influence within a year. Action prompted reaction. That was the galactic order. But humanity didn't react to the reaction that wasn't there. Earth's Secretary General, a meticulous economist named Dr. Yuri Okafor-Bless, gave a single press conference on the steps of the new Geneva Administrative Complex and spoke for 11 minutes. She explained, with the calmness of someone presenting a quarterly report, that Earth had not closed diplomatic channels. It had simply ended the pretense that a diplomatic body composed largely of species hostile to human interests was a neutral arbiter of those interests. We remain open to bilateral negotiations with any species that wishes to engage with us as equals, she said. We have no interest in hostility. We have considerable interest in honesty. Then she went back inside and returned to managing the largest infrastructure withdrawal in history. Because that was the thing the Council hadn't fully processed yet. When humanity left, it took its work with it. Lieutenant Priya Nasco had returned to Earth by the time the full scope of this became apparent. She was sitting in a briefing room in New Geneva, watching the economic cascade data flow across her screens, when Director Kale Osornu of the Colonial Trade Bureau walked in and sat down across from her with the expression of a man who had just witnessed something equal parts terrible and satisfying. The Sorelian navigation grid went down this morning, he said. Priya looked up. Which nodes? All of them. Turns out 42% of the quantum relay maintenance in the Sorelian outer reach was being done under subcontract by Terran tech firms. The contracts expired 6 months ago. Nobody renewed them because everyone assumed the Council relationship would continue. Nobody told the firms, nobody told the Council. He paused. The Sorelians have been flying with a navigation grid running on memory cache for 6 months. Today it hit its limit. Priya set down her stylus. 6 months. The Zorvac situation is worse, Kale said. He pulled up a chart. Their deep space refueling infrastructure in the outer Kethra runs on a drive system licensed from Terran Engineering in 2280. The license included maintenance protocols, part fabrication rights, and software update packages. As of the withdrawal date, those protocols are null. Their engineering core can maintain existing installations, but they cannot build new ones, and they cannot upgrade existing ones past current generation. He tapped the screen. The outer Kethra is their primary expansion corridor. On a Zorvac hegemony warship above the gas giant Ketharvis, Fleet Commander Drul Sareth Vaughn received a priority communication from the hegemony capital. Commander Vaughn was a decorated officer, 4 carapace segments of military distinction, 2 antennae trimmed in the blue-black of the senior command caste. He'd spent 30 years believing the Zorvac were the preeminent military power in the Kethra cluster. The communication changed his understanding somewhat. The message from Capital was precise. The hegemony's independent analysis of Terran technology integration into Zorvac military and civil infrastructure had returned a number that nobody wanted to say out loud. 37%. More than a third of Zorvac operational capability rested, in one form or another, on Terran origin technology, licenses, or maintenance agreements. The number would have been higher, the Capital admitted, if the hegemony's own engineers hadn't been working from Terran blueprints for the past 20 years and quietly redesigning things as independent Zorvac innovations. The humans had known. Commander Vaughn realized this slowly, the way you realize a much larger predator has been watching you from the shadows. The humans had known, and they had said nothing, and they had let the dependency grow, and then one day, while the Council was busy reclassifying humanity as a developmental species, they had simply stood up and said, "We're done." Vaughn forwarded the message to his operations staff with 3 words added at the top: "Do not escalate." He was not the only military commander in the galaxy to send that instruction in the same week. Back on Earth, Kale Drenworth was not celebrating. He sat in his apartment in New Geneva's diplomatic quarter, a modest place book-lined with windows that looked out over the lake, and read the incoming reports with the same quiet attention he gave to everything. Military stand-downs. Council emergency sessions. Frantic bilateral contact requests from 6 species. Priya called him on the 3rd day. Executor Valzen wants a private channel, she said. Which channel? Not through the Council relay. Direct drafter. They're requesting a new framework. Bilateral. Kale was quiet for a moment. Tell them yes. But make clear the framework parameters. We talk as equals or we don't talk. And the Council's emergency session tomorrow? We won't be attending, he said. Send them a message. Polite. Wishing them good fortune in their deliberations. That's it. That's it. He paused. Sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing. Titan Station had been built as a research outpost. In the 6 months following the withdrawal, it had become the most important diplomatic hub in known space, Because humanity had decided, after careful deliberation, that it didn't need a galactic council. It needed a network. The difference was architectural, and the architecture was deliberate. A galactic council had a center. It had a chamber, a voting system, a bureaucracy, and a set of rules that, as humanity had discovered, tended to evolve in favor of whoever controlled the center. A network had nodes. Each node was sovereign. Each connection was negotiated. Nothing was imposed. Everything was chosen. Dr. Yuri Okafor-Bless had coined the framework name in a white paper she'd written in 2319, 3 years before the withdrawal, the Sovereign Compact Network. The SCN had no permanent seat, no Secretary-General, no arbitration body. What it had was a set of bilateral and multilateral treaties, each independently ratified, each with explicit exit clauses, each built around a specific domain: trade, navigation, environmental protection, information sharing. It was, as the Omnivex Conclave's lead analyst had noted in a message that arrived at Titan Station on day 47, structurally immune to the centralization dynamics that have historically allowed dominant species to capture galactic governance institutions. The Omnivex had requested admission to the SCN in the same message. They were the first. They weren't the last. Ambassador Cale Drenworth stood at the observation deck of Titan Station's upper ring, looking out at the cream and gold banding of Saturn's atmosphere, as Dr. Leora Eshan, humanity's chief treaty architect, walked him through the current status. The Drath Collective signed the Navigation Safety Compact last Tuesday, Leora said. She was a compact woman in her mid-30s, with the rapid-fire efficiency of someone who processed information faster than she could comfortably speak it. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and she had the habit of talking with her hands. That gives us 12 signatories on navigation, 8 on the Environmental Standard Framework, and the Trade Reciprocity Network now has 19 active bilateral agreements. Zorvac. Still in observation status. They've sent 3 unofficial inquiries in the last month. Cerelian? Leora's expression shifted slightly. 2 months ago they submitted a formal apology document. First in their species history, apparently. Cale raised an eyebrow. They acknowledged the voting weight manipulations going back to the 2251 amendment, Leora continued. In writing. With historical documentation. She paused. They're asking for trade reciprocity. Start with the environmental framework, Cale said. Low stakes. Good faith builder. Agreed. Leora pulled up her next data point. Valzen is on station. The Drath Collective wants to discuss something the executor is calling the deeper question. Cale turned from the Saturn view. Which deeper question? That, Leora said carefully, appears to be what the executor wants to explain in person. The Drath Collective envoy quarters on Titan Station had been custom-built to accommodate beings of Valzen's stature and environmental requirements. The air was cooler, the pressure slightly higher, and the lighting spectrum shifted toward ultraviolet. Cale entered without ceremony and found the executor standing motionless before a viewport, its biomechanical frame silhouetted against the rings. Ambassador Drenworth, it said without turning. I have been reconsidering a great deal over the past 6 months. I imagine many have, Cale said. The Drath Collective is older than all current council members by 300,000 years, Valzen said. Its voice modulator carried notes that human ears decoded as solemn, though Cale knew the Drath had 78 distinct emotional registers that didn't map cleanly to human feeling. We have observed the rise of 9 galactic-scale civilizations. We have observed the collapse of 6. Cale waited. The collapses shared a pattern, Valzen continued. A dominant civilization creates an institutional framework that encodes its own primacy. Smaller civilizations adapt to that framework or are absorbed by it. The institution grows rigid. It cannot process the emergence of a new capability class. The executor finally turned. Its compound eyes reflected Saturn's light in fractured gold. Humanity emerged as a new capability class 15 years before your withdrawal. The Council was constitutionally incapable of recognizing this. We saw it. We chose not to act. Why? Cale asked. Because the institution was useful to us. The Drath Collective benefits from stability. We miscalculated the cost of defending an institution whose time had passed. Pause. We miscalculated you. Cale held the executor's gaze. What is the deeper question, executor? Whether your sovereign compact network is designed to be what the Council was, Valzen said, or something genuinely different. It's designed to be different, Cale said. Whether it stays different is a function of the choices every signatory makes, every year for as long as it exists. That answer, the executor said slowly, is either the wisest thing I have heard a Terran say, or the most naive. Probably both, Kale said. We're like that. The executor made a sound that Kale's translation implant interpreted, after a moment's processing, as a laugh. It was the first time the implant had ever rendered that output for a draft communication. The collective, Valzen said, would like to discuss founding membership. The station at Callisto Deep had been built in 9 months. This was, by any reasonable measure, impossible. The Zorvac hegemony's fastest construction programs took years to complete stations of comparable scale. The Cerelian Communion, famous for their fabrication technology, had never assembled a major installation in under 14 months. The Omnivex Conclave had done it once in 11. Humanity had done it in 9, and the station was beautiful. Not in the ornate, imposing way of Varith Prime. No 40-meter doors, no mineral carved from rare asteroids, no holographic banners floating in carefully managed air. Callisto Deep was clean and functional, with wide corridors and high ceilings, built from materials that were openly sourceable and easily repaired, with environmental systems that could be tuned to support 23 different species' biological needs simultaneously. Every decision in its construction had been made with the same quiet, unornamented practicality that characterized everything humanity had been building, in secret and in plain sight, for the past 15 years. Dr. Leora Eshan stood at the entrance to the main assembly chamber and watched the delegates arrive. The Drath Collective's executor Valzen entered first, founding member privilege, and the executor had been characteristically direct about claiming it. Behind the executor came the 3 chassis of the Omnivex Conclave, their processors quiet now, no longer humming with emergency computation. The Vrethii, the small species that had been absorbed by the Zorvac 50 years ago, sent a delegation of 7, their first independent diplomatic appearance in half a century. The Omnivex had quietly supported their recognition as a sovereign party under the Navigation Safety Compact's secondary clauses. It had been, as Kale noted, an elegant piece of framework design. 22 delegations. 22 sovereign parties ranging from humanity, young, fast and perpetually underestimated, to the ancient Drath Collective, who had been watching galactic civilization cycle through iterations longer than Earth had possessed complex life. The Zorvac were last. Fleet Commander Drul Sareth Vaughn had been selected as the Zorvac observer, not a full delegate, not yet, but present. He entered the chamber with the measured composure of someone who had spent the past year quietly revising assumptions. He was escorted to the observer gallery, a respectful distance from the main table, and sat without ceremony. Ambassador Kale Drenworth waited until all parties were settled before he moved to the speaker's position. It was not a podium. The chamber had no central elevated position. It had a speaking circle, a ring inlaid in the floor where any delegate could stand and be heard equally from every direction. The acoustics were engineered for it. Kale stood in the circle and looked around the room. I want to be honest about what this is, he said, and what it isn't. The chamber was quiet. This is not a new galactic council, he said. It is not an institution that will grow over time, to adjudicate your disputes and manage your expansion and decide what you're allowed to be. The Sovereign Compact Network is not designed to become that, and if you find, in 10 years or 50 years or 100 years, that it is becoming that, the exit clause is in every treaty, it is unilateral, and it requires no notice period. He paused. We put that in deliberately. Executor Valzen, seated at the main table, inclined its massive head in what Leora had come to recognize as Drath acknowledgement. What this is, Kale continued, is an agreement to be honest with each other. About capabilities. About interests. About the fact that every species in this room has, at various points in history, done things to other species that we would prefer to discuss with the clinical language of policy, rather than the plain language of harm. The compact doesn't erase that history. It just asks us to build something different with what comes next. He reached into his jacket and placed a small object on the floor of the speaking circle. It was a data chip, identical to the one he'd placed on the podium at Varith Prime 1 year ago. The founding documents of the Sovereign Compact Network, he said. Every signatory's ratification. Every treaty text. Every exit clause. Every side agreement. All of it is open, all of it is public, and all of it is available to any species in this galaxy that wants to read it, including the ones who aren't in this room yet. He stepped back out of the speaking circle. There was a silence, not the tense, bristling silence of Varith Prime's council chamber, but something slower and more considered. Dr. Leora Eshan, watching from the side of the room, found herself thinking about the difference between silence as threat and silence as thought. The Galactic Council had used silence as a weapon, that particular oppressive quiet before a vote you already knew would go against you. This silence was different. It was 22 civilizations, some ancient beyond measure, actually thinking about something new. It was Fleet Commander Vaughn who broke it. He stood from the observer gallery, which technically he wasn't supposed to do during the formal opening. Kale noticed and said nothing. Leora noticed and held her breath. Commander Vaughn, Valzen said, its translation module adding a note that came through as gentle correction. The observer gallery is not. I know, Vaughn said. I wanted to ask a question before we formalize anything. If the founding members permit. Kale nodded. The Terran withdrawal documentation, Vaughn said carefully, included 17 appendices detailing legal and technical grounds for leaving the Council. Our analysts have spent the past year reviewing them. Pause. The Zorvac hegemony's legal team agrees on 17 of the 17 points that the human position was correct. The admission dropped into the chamber like a stone into water. The hegemony, Vaughn continued, operated for 40 years on the assumption that our size and age entitled us to define the terms of galactic participation for younger species. We were wrong. Not by a small margin. He straightened his carapace. We are requesting conditional membership in the Sovereign Compact Network. We understand the conditions involve an independent audit of all resource corridor transit fees collected from Terran vessels between 2255 and 2298. 43 years of fees, Leora said quietly, mostly to herself. Yes, Vaughn said. He looked at Kale. We are prepared to negotiate restitution terms. Kale studied the Zorvac commander for a long moment. This was the part that hadn't been in any plan, not in the 14-year legal preparation, not in the economic modeling, not in the Admiralty's contingency planning. This was the part that happened because a civilization, faced with the clear evidence of its own failures, chose something different. We'll schedule the audit framework discussion for day 3 of the session, Kale said. Welcome to the table, Commander Vaughn. Vaughn sat back down in the observer gallery. His antennae, Leora noticed, had shifted to a blue-black shade she didn't recognize from her Zorvac cultural briefings. She flagged it for the translation team. The answer came back 3 minutes later. It was a color associated with relief. That evening, as the first day's sessions concluded, Kale stood again at an observation window, not Saturn this time, but Jupiter, massive and churning below Callisto's horizon. Priya Nasco came to stand beside him with 2 cups of something hot. 23 delegations tomorrow, she said. The Vrethii ambassador asked if they could bring additional staff. Apparently they've never had additional diplomatic staff before. Tell them yes, Kale said. Tell them they can bring as many as they want. Priya was quiet for a moment. Do you think it holds? The network. All of it. Kale considered the question the way he considered all important questions, not rushing past it, not retreating from its difficulty. Outside, Jupiter's storm systems rotated with ancient indifference to everything humanity had accomplished in the last year. I think it holds as long as we keep building it honestly, he said. The moment we start protecting the institution instead of the purpose, the moment the network becomes something we defend because it's ours, not because it's right, that's when it starts becoming what we left. And if that happens? Then I hope whoever's standing here in 100 years has the sense to walk out, he said. The same way we did. Priya looked at him. You designed an institution with the assumption that it should eventually be abandoned. I designed an institution with the assumption that every institution eventually needs to be rethought, Kale said. There's a difference. He picked up his cup. Outside, the gas giant turned. Somewhere across known space, 47 civilizations were reading humanity's founding documents, studying the network's open treaty architecture, calculating costs and benefits and risks, the same calculation species had always made. But the framework had changed. The exit clauses were real. The transparency was genuine. The table was actually round. Whether that was enough was a question the universe would answer in its own time. Humanity had learned, over 47 years at the outer ring of someone else's council, that the only way to know if something was possible was to try building it anyway. So they built.